What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to my podcast. My name is Colin Hayes. I am your host of the Financial Planning for Those Retiring in 5 to 10 Years podcast. And in today's episode, I'm going to cover one of the most confusing topics in retirement planning, and that is Medicare. I've had countless conversations with people who are approaching 65. Maybe they're 5 years away, 7 years away, 10 years away. And almost every single one of them says something similar. They say, I know I need Medicare. I know Medicare is coming up, but I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And honestly, that's understandable. There are so many different parts of Medicare. Enrollment deadlines, penalties, income surcharges, employer coverage rules, Medicare Advantage, Medigap. It can feel overwhelming, and it can be a scary thought if you were to make a mistake. So in today's episode, I'm going to simplify Medicare and walk through things like the different parts of Medicare, when you actually enroll, what the special enrollment period is, common mistakes that can become expensive, IRMAA and why your income matters, and different planning opportunities that could potentially save you thousands of dollars in your retirement. So let's jump in to the first part. What is the different parts of Medicare? Think of Medicare like building a house. You have your floor, you have your roof, you have your walls, you have different parts of a house. Just like with Medicare, there are different parts. Part A is your hospital insurance. Part A covers things like hospital stays, skilled nursing facility care, hospice, and some home health care. Most people don't pay a premium for Part A, because they've worked and paid into Medicare taxes for at least 10 years. So if you've had earned income for at least 10 years and you paid into Medicare taxes, you probably don't pay a premium for Part A. However, Part A still has deductibles and cost sharing when you use it, you just don't have a premium. Part B is your medical insurance. Part B covers things like doctor visits, specialists, lab work, preventative care, outpatient surgeries, physical therapy, and durable medical equipment. Now, everyone pays a monthly premium for Part B, unless they are delaying it because they have qualifying employer coverage, which I'll talk about later in this episode. But everyone pays a monthly premium for Part B. And in 2026, the standard Part B premium, so the least everyone pays, is $202.90 a month. $202.90 a month. However, if you have a higher income in retirement, you might pay more because of something called IRMAA, IRMAA, which stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, which I'll talk about later on in this episode. But everyone pays a monthly premium for Part B. The base level in 2026 is $202.90. However, you might actually pay more for the same coverage if you have a higher income in retirement. So that's Part B, medical insurance. Part D is your prescription drug coverage, D for drugs. Part D helps cover prescription medications. Even if you don't take any medications at 65, enrolling when you're first eligible is important unless you have other creditable prescription drug coverage. Because waiting too long without any creditable drug coverage can result in a lifetime late enrollment period. So that's Part D. D stands for drugs. Now I'm going to jump back to Part C. Part C is what is called Medicare Advantage. And this is where many people get confused. Medicare Advantage is not an additional part of Medicare. It's actually an alternative way to receive your Medicare benefits through a private insurance company. These plans typically include medical coverage, drug coverage, dental, vision, hearing, and fitness benefits, but they also typically have provider networks and prior authorization requirements. So for some people, Part C or Medicare Advantage is a great fit. For others, original Medicare paired with a Medigap policy provides more flexibility. See, it's probably already getting confusing here. And the truth is there isn't a universally better option. It depends on you and your health, your travel habits, your preferred doctors, and your financial situation. That's why when you're approaching 65 or approaching Medicare, I recommend talking to a Medicare specialist to help you make an informed decision about what is the best coverage for you. When it comes to the original Medicare and Medicare Advantage, this is usually one of the biggest decisions that retirees make. Original Medicare generally provides you broader provider access nationwide, especially when paired with a Medigap policy. But Medicare Advantage plans often have lower premiums and additional benefits, but usually require network providers and may have different rules for referrals and approvals. Sometimes the cheapest monthly premium isn't always the least expensive option over the course of retirement. That is why the decision about Medicare and around Medicare should be made as part of an overall retirement plan, not just based on an advertisement you see on TV or a postcard you get in the mail or your friend says, hey, talk to this guy, he's great. Next thing is, when do you enroll? Well, you have what's called an initial enrollment period, and that lasts 7 months. It is the 3 months before you turn 65, the month you turn 65, and then 3 months after you turn 65. So 7 months total in your initial enrollment period. If you're already collecting Social Security by the time you turn 65, you'll generally be enrolled automatically into Parts A and B, but it's always good to double check. If you're not receiving Social Security at 65, you usually need to enroll yourself. Missing this enrollment window without having a qualifying coverage can create permanent penalties or delays in coverage. And I'll talk about qualifying coverage here in a second. So that's the initial enrollment period. 7 months, 3 months before, the month of your birthday, and 3 months after you turn 65. That's your initial enrollment period. But you may have what's called a special enrollment period. This is incredibly important because if you plan to work past the age of 65 and you're covered by your employer's group health plan through active employment, you can often delay Part B without penalty. Then, when you retire from that job and you lose the employer coverage, or both, you'll typically qualify for a special enrollment period. Retiree coverage, or COBRA, or marketplace insurance generally do not allow you to delay Part B without potential penalties. This is a mistake I see sometimes is someone will say, well, my insurance counts, and then I delay Medicare, and then later they find out they owe a permanent late enrollment period. So how long does your special enrollment period, if you fall into this circumstance? It lasts for 8 months. So you have 8 months from the month after your employment or your employer group health plan coverage ends, whichever happens first. However, if your special enrollment period is triggered by a specific exceptional circumstance, things like natural disaster, emergencies, and I'll leave some links down in the description to kind of explain this, your window only lasts for 2 months. So now you know a little bit about when you enroll for Medicare. What about the cost of that Part B? You've heard me mention this earlier on in the episode, something called IRMAA, or Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. What does that mean and how does that work? So think of IRMAA as Medicare's income surcharge. If your income is above certain thresholds, you'll actually pay more each month for Medicare Part B and Part D. Your Medicare premiums are based on your income from 2 years earlier. So in 2028, your Medicare premiums will be based on 2026. In 2030, they'll be based on 2028. It's a 2-year look back. And this is why planning ahead is important. For 2026, depending on if you're single filer, married filing jointly, head of household, it's all different based on your filing status. There are different brackets that if you fall into those brackets, your premiums will increase. And one thing that's important to understand is that IRMAA brackets are cliffs, not marginal. And what that means is if you are $1 into the next bracket, your premiums go to that amount. So it's a cliff. The minute you fall over $1 into the next bracket, your premium for Part B and Part D increase to that next amount. So for example, if a married couple filing jointly has a modified adjusted gross income of $218,000, they are in the first IRMAA bracket. But if their income, the modified adjusted gross income, is $218,001, they have crossed into the next bracket and will pay the higher Medicare premiums associated with that tier. This is why careful tax planning can be so valuable. Sometimes managing income to stay just below that next IRMAA threshold can save hundreds or even thousands of dollars in Medicare premiums over the course of 1 year. Just to give you an example, in 2026, that first tier, which is for married filing jointly, $218,000 of modified adjusted gross income or less, you pay the normal Part B monthly premium of $202.90. But if your modified adjusted gross income is $342,000 to $410,000, you're paying $527.50 per month, or about a $325 more per month per person. So a couple, you multiply that by 2 in Part B premiums for the same coverage as everybody else. So this is why tax planning and careful tax planning can be valuable. Maybe you've sold a business. Maybe you've sold appreciated investments. Maybe you have a large Roth conversion, or you take a lot of money out of your IRAs. Maybe you received a large bonus before retirement. All of those things can increase your modified adjusted gross income and potentially push you into a higher IRMAA bracket 2 years later. Sometimes it makes sense to spread Roth conversions out, if you go that route, over several years instead of doing one large conversion. Maybe it's coordinating withdrawals, capital gains, and other sources of income to help keep you below the next IRMAA threshold. This is why tax planning today, but also looking at the future, especially when you're on Medicare, can be very important. However, because Medicare premiums are based on 2 years prior, if your income has dropped due to a qualifying life-changing event, is what it's called, you don't necessarily have to pay that higher Medicare premium. You might be able to file what's called the Form SSA-44, which allows you to ask the Social Security Administration to recalculate your IRMAA using your more recent lower income instead of the default 2-year lookback. Common qualifying life-changing events include retirement or complete work stoppage, reduction of work hours, death of a spouse, divorce, marriage, loss of pension income, loss of income-producing property due to circumstances beyond your control. So for example, if you retired this year after earning a high salary for a long time, your Medicare premiums might initially be based off that higher income, right? In 2026, you had a really high income. Your Medicare premiums, if you are on Medicare in 2028, will be based off of 2026. Because you have that higher income, well, it might look like you're always going to have that higher income. So you could file the Form SSA-44, and you could reduce your Part B and Part D premiums much sooner instead of waiting for the 2-year look back to catch up. Assuming 2 years from now, you're not making the same money you were making when you were working. But one important caveat is one-time income events, such as large Roth conversions, selling appreciated investments, generally do not qualify as life-changing events. That's another reason why proactive tax planning before Medicare can be very valuable. But what I want to emphasize here is, I know I spent a lot of time talking about IRMAA. The goal is not always to avoid every IRMAA bracket. Sometimes it can make sense to intentionally go into a higher IRMAA bracket if there is a larger financial planning benefit. Maybe you're doing Roth conversions that increases your taxable income today, but creates significant tax savings in the future. Or maybe you're realizing gains today because it fits into your long-term investment and tax strategy. The mistake is not going into the higher bracket. The mistake is doing it without understanding the impact. Which IRMAA bracket are you going into? How much will your Medicare premiums increase? What is the long-term benefits of the decision you're making? And whether that strategy still makes sense after factoring in the additional Medicare costs. Good retirement planning isn't about avoiding every tax or every cost. It's about making intentional decisions where you understand the trade-offs. Sometimes paying a little bit more Medicare premiums today can actually create a much better financial outcome over the next 20 or 30 years. But the key is making that decision with a plan so there aren't any surprises. I know I talked a lot about IRMAA right there, but it's a very important piece. So I'm going to move on now to some common Medicare mistakes. Here are just a few bullet point lists of mistakes I see people make. They miss their enrollment deadline, so then they have a lifetime of penalties. They assume employer coverage always means that you can delay Medicare. They don't understand the special enrollment period rules. They don't understand the timelines with special enrollment period. They ignore prescription drug coverage, Part D, because they don't currently take medication when they're filing for Medicare. They choose a plan based only on the monthly premiums, whether that's original Medicare with Medigap or Medicare Advantage. They're just looking simply at the premiums. They forget that income affects Medicare premiums through IRMAA, make some big decision, and then 2 years later have a unintentional cost of higher Medicare premiums for a year. A surprise that they weren't expecting. And each of these mistakes can end up costing far more than people realize. As you probably heard me say many times on this podcast, Medicare in this example, but other financial decisions shouldn't be looked at in isolation. It's not a Medicare decision only, because Medicare and the different plan you're on and the IRMAA and the costs affects retirement income, taxes, Roth conversion opportunities, Social Security timing, healthcare expenses, estate planning, cash flow. The best Medicare decision is usually one that fits into your entire retirement plan, not just a decision made out of isolation. I know Medicare can definitely feel overwhelming at first, but once you understand the pieces, it can become much easier to make an informed decision. The goal isn't to just get enrolled. The goal is to make a decision that fits your retirement plan for the next 20 or 30 years. That's why it can be a good idea to sit down with a Medicare specialist, one that is not there with an ulterior motive, one that is able to help you understand the different choices with Medicare, help you understand the different options, the different costs, the different all-in costs, to make the best decision that is best for you and your situation. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you found this episode helpful, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who is getting close to age 65. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual.